Greetings, colleagues from North Caucasus Federal University in Stavropol, Russia. Hello from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. My name is Dr. Leslie Ebley Trudel, and I am an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Winnipeg. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about remote learning for students with additional needs. Before I do that, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Winnipeg is in Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Oji-Cree, the Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In Canada, we do land acknowledgements to show our respect for the land, a tradition that dates back centuries for Indigenous peoples. Land acknowledgements have been adopted as a common practice in civic and community spaces, and it is a small but important step towards reconciliation. Early in the pandemic, most governments worldwide temporarily closed educational institutions in light of the crisis brought on by the spread of COVID 19. Similar to other Canadian provinces, the Manitoba government followed suit by announcing a plan early in 2020 to also suspend classes due to the pandemic. Our Education Minister, Kelvin Goertzen, along with counterparts across the country, quickly reconsidered temporary periods of shutdown and announced in April that classes would be suspended indefinitely. And this brought about a pivot to what became known as remote learning or learning at home. And along with it, a great deal of uncertainty and concern on the part of educators, parents, and community members alike. We know that schools are institutions of learning, but the COVID 19 dilemma demonstrated that their purpose extends far beyond that basic function. Inherently, schools also provide nutrition to hungry students. They deliver services and supports for youth with additional needs. They facilitate programming and sports to engage and balance out the school day, and they contribute to a sense of family and community for many who don't have that. In times of disruptive change, such as that was experienced during the COVID 19 crisis, we know that systems leadership is more critical than ever. Canada's Michael Fullen added that it is essential to plan for the unknown, but it's also important to focus on known factors, which can help organizations deliver positive outcomes even in uncertain times. And so, to demonstrate this, Manitoba Education initiated a kindergarten to grade 12 response planning team, which identified key priority areas which would be required to help schools and teachers support student learning during this unprecedented journey. The seven priorities cited by the provincial government included the elements that you see on your screen. Subcommittees were convened in each areas, and the expectation was that each of the key areas would have detailed next steps. At the time, my name was brought forward to participate in the fourth bullet on your screen, the area of student services supports, to find solutions in a variety of different scenarios for students with additional learning needs. So, the communication that was sent to me via email detailed the committee as requiring the following: assisting student services teams in maintaining contact with students, their families, and or direct service providers to ensure continued access to appropriate educational programming and social emotional behavioral supports for students. And there were several other ideas that were attached along with that, but the main idea was to ensure that continued access to appropriate educational programming. And so the process of developing priorities and recommendations as well as any other matters of consideration, started in motion. At the time when I was asked to be part of this committee, I was reading this book, Atomic Habits by James Clear. And in the book, author James Clear discusses the difference between being in motion versus taking action. He says that while both states appear to be similar, he reminds us that they are actually quite different in nature. James Clear states that when we are in motion, we plan, we strategize, and we learn, but when we're in action, we engage in behavior that delivers outcomes. So, as I stated carefully before, we started in motion, given that the work forthcoming would create a solid and strategic foundation on which to build. So, if you can imagine a very quickly established group of educators with backgrounds in the areas of student services and supporting youth with additional needs, received an invitation to a conference meeting, a web conference meeting. Of course, time was of the essence with the task at hand, given that Manitoban youth were about to complete their typical spring break and they were going to have to go back to learning, and this time it would be remote learning. So, what you can see on the screen now are 8 working groups in the area of student services supports. And these areas were defined by the director of the Inclusion Support Branch at Manitoba Education, who led the group through the structure and process of the proposed work. First, short term priorities would be identified, and then this would be followed by assigning working groups to tackle each of those priority areas. Subsequent to that, the working groups would be asked to update the larger committee on progress. Now, although this all appeared very logical and reasonable, I realized after exploring the priority area to which I had been assigned that the details were copious, they were overwhelming, and they were confounding. Which items would eventually be given precedence to ensure sufficient and equitable supports for students? Could remote learning or could remote delivery of instruction, which was dependent on technology, actually take place when so many in our province lacked access to technology and bandwidth? Well, the individuals assigned to working groups were expected to tackle all of these questions and also to prepare updates for the following subcommittee meetings. The days that followed involved meetings of those working groups to tackle key elements within each category. The groups were asked to delve deeply into their assigned areas to focus on priorities, recommendations, and other items for consideration. The link here between logical structures and effective communication is powerful. Canadian researchers Cates and Dack identify these structures as protocols, and they are used essentially to interrupt a strategy in motion with the intention of enhancing learning. The protocol that was outlined for the groups in this case not only offered clarity amidst large amounts of information, but also manageability in terms of conveying key ideas and a framework for the purpose of presenting this information. Prior to reporting back to the subcommittee, our working groups were asked to identify urgent or key messages that could be used in a briefing to the larger team, in addition to sharing each group's discussion protocols. So, what resulted is contained in the link here. And so, what I'm about to tell you is that Manitoba Education eventually used all of the information that was submitted to them from those working groups to create a public document which was titled Resources Supporting Students with Special Needs and Students at Risk. And it is located on the Manitoba Education website, and it can be located at the link that I've provided for you in this slide. And you'll be able to see the work of each of those different working groups that were part of the larger subcommittee on student services supports. To extend this conversation to post-secondary, I would like to talk to you about something that I was involved with as a co-chair. It's called the University of Winnipeg Remote Hub. And again, the link to the Remote Hub is contained in this slide. The University of Winnipeg launched a remote teaching, learning, and research hub to support students and faculty making the quick pivot to online and alternate course delivery during the 2021 academic year. It was created by a multidisciplinary team of educators, librarians, and academic technology experts. As co chair of the remote committee, I was quoted as saying, "We know that digital learning is new for many students and faculty, so we wanted to create a space that brings all resources you need into one place. So whether you're teaching, learning, or researching, you don't need to go searching for the tools that you need to succeed." The structure that you see on the slide here gives you an idea of the three areas that were involved in the virtual hub: remote teaching, remote research, and remote learning. For professors and instructors, there are tips on setting up a course remotely, engaging or supporting post-secondary students remotely, and there are tips for managing stress. For researchers, there are tips on how to conduct research during a pandemic, advice on changes in ethics protocols, as well as instructions on how to collaborate or run a conference during a pandemic. For students, there are resources to support learning online, information on supports for mental health and well-being, and there's also information on how to use various types of technology in order to access their learning. Where educational leaders focus during times of disruptive change often define them as leaders. Australian educator Dr. Deborah Nedelicki adds that in a crisis, leaders must not only act swiftly and with foresight, but must also consider options and consequences, as well as the side effects of the actions that they choose to take. The work done by the University of Winnipeg on the remote hub serves to exemplify a quickly and carefully adopted resource to put in place new supports as required for instruction, research, and learning in a virtual environment. This site is constantly being updated with new information as it is available to ensure accessibility of education at the post secondary level during this challenging time of the pandemic. As well, the direction taken by Manitoba Education and the response planning team with each of the working groups that I described was crucial in terms of the support provided to schools, teachers, families, and students. Together, Manitobans will be working to provide the best possible outcomes for children with additional needs and youth and adults during this time of unprecedented crisis and change. Thank you very much for your time and attention today, and the very best wishes for your conference. Take good care.